Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for the House Agriculture Committee's first hybrid hearing during this unprecedented time in our nation's recent history. The COVID-19 pandemic has brought with it an economic toll that has left millions of Americans jobless and without the basic income needed to purchase food for their families. More than 40 million Americans have applied for unemployment as a result of pandemic-related job losses. At one point, 40% of Americans making less than $40,000 a year lost their jobs. In my state of Ohio, SNAP caseloads increased by 21% from February to May. According to Feeding America, which represents 200 food banks across the nation, demand has increased an average of 70%. Many have read the heartbreaking stories about the thousands of people across the country who lined up for miles to receive food, many of them people who had never experienced visiting a food bank. We also heard stories about milk dumping and backups along the hog and poultry supply chains, forcing farmers to make excruciatingly difficult choices. Congress passed several bipartisan pieces of legislation that were signed into law and helped expand aid to distressed farmers, rural businesses, and small towns, and provided food assistance to vulnerable children and families. We can all agree that additional help was, and still is, needed to assist our farmers, businesses, and vulnerable people experiencing hardship as COVID-19 cases continue to rise and the economic damage that comes with that. Today's hearing is focused on the administration's $3 billion program intended to quickly deliver fresh food to those in need. On April 17, 2020, Secretary of Agriculture Sonny Perdue announced the creation of the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program, known as CFAP, to provide $19 billion in financial relief to farmers, ranchers, and consumers. This includes $16 billion in direct payments to producers impacted by the drop in commodity prices and the disruption in food supply chains. It also includes the Farmers to Families Food Box Program, which provides $3 billion in fresh produce, dairy, and meat product purchases for distribution through food banks and other nonprofit organizations. However, despite some reports of nonprofits successfully receiving and delivering food to people in need, including in my district, the effort is clearly not working for everyone. Since the Farmers to Families Food Box Program was announced on April 17th, several issues have been raised regarding the program's implementation and delivery. It has been broadly reported that the program fell well short of its initial commitment to providing 40 million boxes of food to food banks, churches, and other nonprofit organizations by the end of June 2020. We've seen reports of companies awarded contracts with little to no experience in the timely sourcing and distribution of food, including nearly $40 million to a Texas wedding planner. The contractor committed to providing 750,000 boxes of food. To date, it has distributed fewer than a third of that promise. Our ranking member frequently complains about what he sees as waste, fraud, and abuse in our anti-hunger programs, but I'd like to know if he's concerned about the egregious failures in his own backyard. Some awardees have no prior experience working with food banks or even wholesale food distribution. Other contract recipients have reportedly spent money on lobbying and PR instead of diverting the money into more food for the hungry. We've heard about inconsistencies in the coordination between distributors and nonprofits on the amount of food a nonprofit can handle, resulting in food spoiling in 90-degree weather. We've heard from food banks, which have historically enjoyed a good working relationship with USDA's Food and Nutrition Service, that there are no clear points of contact within the Agricultural Marketing Service to submit complaints or ask questions. This committee requested, and to date has not received, any information on how USDA and distributors are tracking which nonprofits are receiving food boxes. USDA has also failed to provide sufficient rationale for how it determined regional food distribution, such that Puerto Rico is in the same region as Pennsylvania, and the Virgin Islands is in the same region as Maine. Nor has USDA responded to public criticism by publishing information on how they are ensuring only legitimate and experienced nonprofits participate in the program. In my district in Cleveland, Ohio, our food banks and nonprofits have the benefit of working with a seasoned distributor that has served local emergency food providers for over 100 years. However, if the stated mission of the Families to Food Box program is not being accomplished everywhere, either through misspent funds, mismanagement, or inconsistent operations, then this program is creating hardships instead of relieving them. It is clear greater transparency and oversight are needed to shed light on a program designed in the dark by USDA, outside of the Farm Bill, in the absence of input from Congress, or experienced agriculture stakeholders and emergency food providers. A program intended to feed the hungry that fails to operate consistently and equitably for all people across this nation is unacceptable. That is not good government and only lends itself to fraud, waste, and abuse of taxpayers' dollars. Today's hearing is only the beginning. I intend to closely review this program to ensure that it meets its intended policy goals and operates efficiently for all those depending on its promised success. I will recognize my colleague, Mr. Johnson, but let me just make this one statement, Mr. Johnson. Because we are in votes and a lot of things are happening, without objection, the chair is authorized at any time to declare the committee in recess subject to the call of the chair. Without objection, thank you. I now recognize my colleague, Mr. Johnson of South Dakota, for any opening remarks he'd like to make.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon. Of course, I want to thank our witnesses on both panels for their participation today. When Secretary Perdue announced the creation of the Farmers to Families Food Box Program, I will admit I was excited. This was a way to expeditiously assist producers, some of whom were, as the chair mentioned, plowing over crops, dumping milk because of supply chain disruptions, as well as an opportunity to help consumers who found themselves in circumstances beyond their control, and many of them in very great need. So USDA's promise to purchase fresh produce, dairy, and certain meat products was indeed welcome news. And to date, their purchases have far exceeded their own goals. Since May 15th, Feeding South Dakota, who I talked to just the other day, has accepted 95,241 boxes. To put that into context, that's more than 1.5 million pounds of food. These boxes have included a combination of produce, fluid milk, protein, and mixed dairy. And again, my reports from the field are that the quality of those boxes have been excellent. Almost 100 communities throughout South Dakota have benefited from the Farmers to Families program. Now, let's be clear, no program, particularly of this size and scope, is ever without growing pains, and indeed, I wrote to the Secretary on May 22nd to further understand some of the things I was reading and some of the things I was hearing about. The Secretary responded, explaining everything from the contracting flexibilities under the Federal Acquisition Regulation Part 18 to PACA licenses to further awards. I thought it was instructive and important data. And here we are, 90 days after the initial announcement of this program, and I get the sense that we are focusing more on the fault and details instead of, at the same time, also celebrating the bold effort and largely successful effort to feed those in need. What has been accomplished really is worthy of celebration, and that would be true regardless of what administration is in charge. Farmers to Families works. It has been successful, and it is doing exactly what it was intended to do, connecting farmers to families in need. But instead of applauding the efforts of the department and the administration, we sit here, and again, I get the sense that we will be cherry-picking challenges that certain areas of the country have faced. Meanwhile, and of great concern to me, the other part of CFAP receives almost no attention from this committee. On April 1st, I helped lead a bipartisan, bicameral group of over 140 members urging targeted, temporary, and equitable relief for cattle producers. And from what I see, and this has been consistent for weeks and weeks, there has been no greater push for assistance than for cattle country. But the CFAP program still came up short, as producers who sold livestock after April 15th only received a fraction of those who sold thereafter. As the pandemic carried on and the situation deteriorated for pork producers, we followed up with other strong bipartisan letters urging support for producers who have been feeling the economic impact of shrinking shackle space. We appreciate the hard work of the department, and I want to make it clear that this is not, much of what I'm talking about is not USDA's fault. As Congress, we have failed to deliver the resources necessary to properly aid our farmers and ranchers. We had to fight hard for that $23.5 billion, and that was a fight to back the efforts of those who are working so hard every day to ensure our food supply chain remains uninterrupted and our store shelves remain stocked. And I'd like to remind members and those viewing at home that in the early days of the pandemic, Republicans asked for $50 billion in dedicated agricultural funding. My hope is that we can come together and fight for enough funding for agriculture in this next package that is going to need to come together in the next week or two. We need to provide resources to both extend coverage for our cattlemen who sold at the bottom of the market after April 15th, and our pork producers who creatively found markets for hogs, but many of them, I'm sorry to say, suffered huge losses to avoid euthanizing their livestock. And I think a hearing on that topic would be very much welcome, at least by me. With that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. And prior to recognizing Mr. Peterson, I just want to make you aware that in consultation with the ranking member and pursuant to Rule 11E, I want to make members of the subcommittee aware that other members of the full committee may join us today. I now recognize Chairman Peterson for any opening comments he would like to make.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your leadership. Mr. Johnson, you as well. As we all know, that the pandemic has really exposed a lot of things in agriculture, not only in production agriculture, but also in the distribution of food. And I hope that we are going to spend quite a bit of time on this committee following up on that and trying to get in a position where we're not going to have this kind of problem in the future, where we are kind of ahead of the curve, if you will. Mr. Johnson, I don't know exactly what he was referring to, but one of my concerns, and I appreciate the money that's been allocated out of the CCC, but I just think that this idea that we're going to give more money to the CCC where we are really having no kind of oversight, no kind of involvement in it whatsoever, is not a good idea in the long term, because you're basically taking the Ag Committee out of this whole situation. So one of the things that I'm going to hope we can do is, as we look at ways to deal with these challenges, that we make sure that this money comes out of the CCC to take care of these challenges. I'm all for that, but just to have an open-ended check, I don't think is necessarily a good idea. And I think maybe some of this stuff that's happened the last couple of years is going to come back and haunt us. Even though it's been a welcome thing, I understand that, and producers needed it, but I'm not sure this is the right way for us to go. And we'll have discussions about that, I'm sure. When I was back a couple of weeks ago, I went over to my local food bank. And I was shocked to find out that their caseload is 57% of what it was at this time last year. They are way below what they were a year ago. And it's been that way for 2 or 3 months. And it's not only in my hometown, it's in that whole area. And I said, well, what do you think's going on here? And he says, well, we're not exactly sure, but maybe it's the unemployment benefits that are being paid, which are more than, the $600 is more than the average net take-home pay of people in my district. So they get these checks, $1,200 checks, they get $600 unemployment. Maybe that's it, we don't know. But I think, we need to look into why it is in our area we're down and why we have actually more food in there than they can store. And then in Marcia's area and places like that, we got lines around the block, right? Marcia trying to get into these, so we need to look at what's going on here and why is there a disparity between different regions of the country and see if there's something we can do to help resolve that. As regards to this box program, I know if I have a problem with this, but what I'm concerned about is, are we, in fact, getting the best bang for our buck with this program? And I talked to the secretary earlier, the undersecretary, and they're doing competitive bidding, and they claim they're making sure that they get the best price. And I think we need to do oversight, Marcia, to make sure that's actually happening. That look into how this competitive bidding is going and how much we're paying for some of these things. Because my sense is that, you're probably getting a better deal through SNAP than we are through these food boxes. I don't know if that's true or not, but I think we need to figure it out and need to take a look at it, So at the bottom line, though, I mean, we need to make sure that people that are unemployed, people that are having a tough time, have enough food, they have enough food to take care of their kids. That's very important. But we also need to make sure that we don't have bureaucracy getting in the way, or we don't have mismatches in the situation. I was getting complaints from some areas where they said they couldn't get the stuff they were buying from the farmers into the food bank, and found out that there's some kind of a third party in some of these food banks where you can't actually give the money directly or give the food to the food bank. You got to go through this third party in order to get qualified, and it takes 5 months to do it. Well, does that make any sense? That's something that we should take a look at as well. So, I think the department is doing as good a job as they can under the circumstances. We're in a crisis. We understand that. But let's take this time over the next few months to take a look at what's been happening, see if there's things that we can do to streamline it, and to make sure that the taxpayers' money that's going into this is spent in the best way. On top of all of that, the talk about some people complaining about the error rate on SNAP and so forth, I just had my staff pull together information on the food bank system, and in 95% of the cases, these are self-certified. And really, from what I can tell, nobody's checking anything. The people show up and they get served. And in a lot of cases, the income limit, if it even was followed, is 200% or 300% of poverty, as opposed to 130 for SNAP. So, I guess that's fine in an emergency, but does that make sense for us to have such strict rules on one program and kind of have an open-ended situation on another? I don't know. Maybe that makes sense, but that's, I think, some of the things that we need to look at. So with that, Madam Chair, I appreciate your leadership and look forward to hearing the witness's testimony.
Thank you very much. I now recognize Ranking Member Conaway for any opening comments he'd like to make.
Madam Chair, I apologize for interrupting. Several members of the committee are not wearing masks. That is required in committee meetings, and I think it is a sign of respect, and frankly, as a doctor, a good health practice to have a mask on at a time of a pandemic.
What am I supposed to do now? Wearing masks, she said. If all of the members would please wear your masks. Mr. Conaway, you're recognized.
Well, thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing, which, quite frankly, is the first since March the 10th for our committee. In fact, the Ag Committee is the last standing committee to have a hearing since the pandemic started, and that's really disappointing. However, based on my good colleague, the chairman's remarks about need for oversight across a broad spectrum of things, I'm hopeful that that gets translated into a lot more aggressive committee activity so that we can actually get to the answers that to the questions that he posed. And Madam Chairman, thank you for breaking the chain of no hearings for a long, long time, so I appreciate that. We're here today. Well, some of us are here. They got folks on the screen over there. They're here as well. To not to discuss the litany of issues impacting farm country that this committee continues to ignore, but to discuss a program that is popular, effective, and working as intended. A program that is meant to supplement, not supplant, the vast nutrition safety net that USDA is responsible for administering for our friends and neighbors in need. Farmers to Families is doing exactly what the Secretary wanted it to do, connect farmers with families impacted by this crisis. This program not only helped producers who found themselves in the middle of major shifts in the supply chain, but consumers who fell victim to unprecedented circumstances. I'm also frustrated with our witness list today. We've got two witnesses whose testimony is darn near identical, coming from backgrounds that are almost identical from the food banks, but we're not hearing from witnesses associated with the hundreds of not-for-profits and community-based organizations out there who've actually been in the fight getting these boxes out of to the consumer. So I would prefer to hear from somebody like that, as well as the folks that we'll actually hear from. So that said, I also appreciate Secretary Abba for coming, and I will look forward to hearing from Mr. Cooper and Mr. Harbush when they get here for the panel. But I think our panel should have been a little broader spectrum for the testimony today. So with that, Mr. Chairman, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you very much. And for the record, you had an opportunity to put a witness on this panel and chose not to do so. The chair would request that other members submit their opening statements for the record so witnesses may begin their testimony to ensure that there is ample time for questions. With that, I would welcome our first panel. I thank you for being here today. At this time, I will introduce our first witness, Undersecretary Greg Ibach. The Undersecretary was confirmed by the Senate and sworn in as Undersecretary for Marketing and Regulatory Programs on October 30th, 2017. In his role as Undersecretary, Mr. Ibach is responsible for carrying out MRP mission area, which is comprised of the Agricultural Marketing Service Agency and the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service Agency. He is accompanied today by Administrator Bruce Summers. Sir, you may begin. You have 5 minutes.
As well as the full committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the Farmers to Family Food Box Program. I am Greg Ibach, the Undersecretary for Marketing and Regulatory Programs in the USDA's mission area. With me today is Bruce Summers, Administrator for the Agricultural Marketing Service, the agency which implements the Food Box Program. Before I begin, Chairwoman Fudge, I want to thank your constituents at the Cleveland Food Bank and the Sampson Company for hosting me in Cleveland to discuss the impact this program has in your community. We were also joined by Produce One and Weir's Farms, two other local food box distributors, and the Grace Christian and Missionary Alliance Church. I am pleased to report what I saw firsthand in your district. As a result of this program, the Cleveland Food Bank is delivering boxes of fresh fruits, vegetables, dairy, and meat to 25,000 newly food-insecure families. The Sampson Company hired or rehired dozens of employees. And the Grace Christian and Missionary Alliance Church shared that distributing boxes to families in need has given the congregation a renewed sense of purpose in these trying times. Wherever I visit, distributors and food banks share handwritten notes from families who consider the Farmers to Families Food Box Program a lifeline during this crisis. I brought several letters today written by families in Cleveland. Today, I would like to provide you with background of how we formulated the program in its current status and next steps. As part of the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program, Secretary Perdue announced on April 17th, USDA utilized authority under the Families First Coronavirus Response Act to purchase and distribute up to $3 billion in fresh produce, dairy, and meat products. The program supplies boxes packaged with fresh fruits and vegetables, dairy products, meat products, and a combination box of produce, dairy, or meat products. Local and regional suppliers package these products into family-sized boxes and then transport them to food banks, community and faith-based organizations, and other nonprofits serving Americans in need. This multi-billion-dollar program stood up in a short period of time addresses three critical needs. One, providing markets for farmers faced with declining demand and the crisis of food rotting in fields and milk being wasted. 2, supplying food to newly unemployed Americans, and 3, utilizing the idled food distribution infrastructure. Employees have been called back to work and even new employees hired, many of whom lost their jobs in other industries. Applicants to the program had to demonstrate capabilities regarding commercial experience, business ethics and integrity standards, food safety and/or experience with regulatory audits, inspections, certifications, and approvals, and financial performance. The amounts and locations awarded were based on the offers received and the evaluation of those offers. I would like to stress 2 important points. 1, all commodities purchased, packaged, and delivered are 100% domestic origin, and 2, no vendor is paid until proof of delivery and compliance with the contract is confirmed. Oversight of the program is ongoing. This program assists in safeguarding U.S. taxpayers' funds and ensuring relevant laws and regulations are followed. Audits are performed to ensure that safe, high-quality, domestically produced products are delivered to food banks and nonprofit, community, and faith-based organizations. Later this week, USDA will announce an opportunity for new and current vendors to submit proposals to utilize approximately $500 to $700 million that will be remaining when current contracts expire. In summation, tens of millions of boxes have been delivered, resulting in hundreds of millions of meals being provided to Americans in need. As Secretary Perdue has stated on multiple occasions, the program is a win-win-win. While the feedback received by the department has been overwhelmingly positive, we are constantly evaluating program operations and inviting input to ensure the program continues to have the most positive impact possible, as we at USDA strive to do right and feed everyone. Again, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I am happy to answer any questions you might have.
I thank the Undersecretary for his testimony. And the chairwoman went up to vote, and so I'll just take care of this till she gets back. So the question I have regards, one of the questions regards what I talked about earlier, and that is the self-certification issue. You know, so there's nobody from the IG or from the GAO or anybody that check any of that stuff. It's all just, here's, you know, taking people's word for it.
So the Farmers to Families Food Box Program was authorized by Congress under the Family First Act, which I believe was the second act that was passed to address the coronavirus. And it, under that, Congress authorized USDA to access such funds as necessary to address the newly unemployed. It does not necessarily fall under the same rules and regulations that FNS's programs does. And so it was designed not to need to be means tested, and so there is a difference there between the Farmers to Family Box Program and the other program.
So if we weren't in this situation, there might be some kind of auditing going on if we were in a normal kind of situation.
At the time that the program was designed, we were hearing from food banks that they were under such need that they didn't have time to go through income verification or means testing, and so it was intentionally designed to.
And our discussion we had earlier here about the how you acquire the dairy and produce and so forth, this is all done on competitive bids.
Again, the Section 32 purchases and all the purchases we make under the other FNS feeding programs are done under competitive bid. The Families to Farmers Food Box Program, because we needed to address getting food out faster, competitive bid wasn't part of the consideration. It was some of the other factors that are they able to prove that they have experience doing this? Are they financially able to do this? So price competitive was not our number one consideration.
But you must be doing some oversight over that. You're not just letting it be wide open.
So we are doing oversight. We do know that the average price of each category of boxes, we can compare that to the marketplace. But there is a difference, and we wanted also to be able to free our contractors to be able to purchase local purchase from farmers in the region where they were going to be distributing the boxes, to make sure the fresh fruits and produce in that region that were being wasted were able to be incorporated into the food box program.
So under normal circumstances, though, there would be some kind of auditing of that process where you're the competitive bidding and so forth?
Yeah, and as we move forward with the second phase that I suggested in the testimony that we would be announcing later this week, a new competitive process, that we're going to elevate the value consideration in our evaluation of those proposals that are forwarded to USDA.
Gentleman from South Dakota?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Thanks, Mr. Ibaugh. I want to start by just highlighting some of the positive feedback that I've heard in South Dakota about this program. Of course, no program is perfect, but Ms. Catherine Anderson of Aberdeen sent the following note of thanks, and I'll make sure that this gets entered into the record of the hearing. To farmers to families, I'm thanking you for the generous boxes I received in Aberdeen, South Dakota. I shared with a divorced friend who cares for an adult disabled son. We were both flabbergasted at the contents of the boxes. It was Christmas in July. Please forward my thank you to any producers, organizers, secretaries, etc. that you can. You made a whopping difference to this person. Logistically, when I consider everything that the department has done, that the distributors have done, and that the food banks who ultimately helped to finish that last mile have done, it's remarkable. It's remarkable how much food's been out there. So thank you for the efforts at the department. There has been some data I've reviewed that has shown the disparities state by state of how many dollars have actually hit per million people. I think that's been put together by your agency. What drives those differences in numbers?
Excuse me. One of the pillars of the program is that contractors had to offer to participate in the program. And so there were certain regions of the country where less people offered to become our contractors, which we were able to analyze and identify as underserved areas in certain places of the United States. We have went to direct contracting, and we have invested $218 million in direct contracting to try to address those underserved areas.
So I know there was a phase 2, a relatively small number of new contracts were issued as a part of phase 2. Did you have any attempts to try to balance some of those regional disparities?
So that direct contracting, the $218 million, was used as part of phase 2 to go directly to those underserved areas. Under phase 2, we've also extended a vast majority of the original contracts because of the success those contractors enjoyed in supplying food boxes to families.
So I know it was in your written testimony, which I reviewed. You may have said it when I ran out to the floor to vote, but I just want to highlight, because I think we've had some legitimate questions about accountability. In your written testimony, at the very least, you noted that a couple of contracts had been terminated, and I suspect there are tools in USDA's toolbox outside of termination that you're also able to use to try to make sure that people are holding up their end of the bargain. Is that right?
198 contracts were awarded out of the nearly 600 contracts offered to USDA. We had one contractor that after being selected decided they did not want to participate, so that contract was terminated. We had another contractor whose circumstances represented in their offer did not hold up after they were awarded the contract, so that contract was terminated. We've had numerous oversight activities on other contracts that were identified as high-risk contracts or gained media attention to assure that those contracts were being responsibly administered.
So to shift a half a step in a different direction, sir, I mean, you've been overseeing an investigation for almost a year now on, inefficiencies or disruptions or concerns in the cattle market. Do you have any updates for us today?
So I think that we are nearing conclusion of that process, and we look forward to being able to release a report from USDA in the very near future.
Well, and maybe after that's released, it'll make sense for, some subcommittee of the Ag Committee to have another hearing. But as long as I've got you in the hot seat, I mean, does Packers and Stockyards, do you all have the resources that would be needed to follow up from anything that would come from that report?
I think that there are going to be several things that come out of that report that members of the committee as well as the industry will want to consider to discuss, and there may be actions that the committee and the industry may want to consider as a result of that report.
Okay. Well, with the little time I have left, I would just, and I'm sure it's a bill you're aware of, but some of us in a bipartisan way have introduced the Direct Act. I think this is an opportunity to try to make sure that state inspected facilities have an opportunity to sell across state lines, direct to consumer. This is, of course, not as flexible as some people want it, but it's laser focused. It's tailored to make sure we don't run afoul of food safety concerns or of trade concerns with other countries. Any observations that you would have on the Direct Act? I mean, we want to try to add more capacity to the interstate system. Did we calibrate our approach right, in your opinion?
So that authority would be within the Undersecretary for Food Safety or the Office for Food Safety, Dr. Brashears. And so I think it would be more appropriate for her to interact with you on answers to those specific questions.
Well, and it won't surprise you at all to know that I've had lots of conversations with her, but given your experience in the marketplace, I wanted to try to put you on the spot anyway. So
Okay.
Thank you very much, ma'am. I yield back.
Thank you very much. I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Eibach, you in your statement indicated that you were awarded up to $1.2 billion in the first round of contracts. How much money has the department actually paid out for invoices in that first round?
So I'll maybe refer to Administrator Summers to give some of those specifics. But first of all, I would like to just hit a couple statistics there. 77% of the contractors that we entered into agreements with delivered 90% or more of the volume they proposed.
Sir, I only have 5 minutes. I just want to know how much has been paid.
At this point, good afternoon. At this point, we have delivered 35 million boxes at the value of about $900 million.
Is that what you have paid out? $900 million that's my question?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Secondly, how is the department verifying these invoices for accuracy?
So the invoices are accompanied with delivery documents showing how many boxes were delivered to which nonprofit organization. So the invoice comes in with an amount, but then it has to be backed up by delivery receipts that are signed by the recipient organization.
So do you have direct contact with the nonprofit organization that is receiving them?
Generally not, unless we have a question.
How many invoices have been rejected?
None have been rejected outright. They will be paid once the appropriate documentation is supplied. At one point, there were about 400 that we were working on. That number has come down significantly since then. But again, if an invoice comes in, doesn't have the appropriate documentation, we go back.
So every invoice that has been submitted to you, you have paid?
Basically, yes.
So I think it's been
There may be a
possible.
few that are pending payment right now, but not very many because round one is basically over.
Okay, does USDA have a publicly available list of participating nonprofits and or food banks by the region and supplier?
We have that for the contractors, the distributors that we are contracting with. We don't have a publicly available list of all of the nonprofits that are working with the distributors that we contracted with.
We would like to see that.
The list of the contractors?
Yes,
Yes, absolutely. That's on our website.
okay.
And we could
So it
provide-
is publicly available?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
It's been updated now, so it is now updated to reflect the new
And-
contracts under round 2 as well, so.
Okay, what were the eligibility requirements for individuals to receive Farmers to Families food boxes?
I'll let you keep going.
So we put out a request for proposals based on a series of criteria. And as the Undersecretary said, we received 600 proposals in response. We evaluated those criteria on a number of factors, including the ability to partner with nonprofit organizations to deliver food to Americans in need. It also looked at past business experience, financial ability to meet the needs of the program, as well as price. It was a series of criteria
So
that
how do
were
we
used.
end up with like a wedding planner?
Every firm, including that one, provided information in their proposal that showed that they had been involved in the distribution of food and had the ability to go out, procure food, pack it in boxes, and deliver it to nonprofit organizations.
But that proved not to be accurate, didn't it?
No, ma'am, they supplied, I think, about 500,000 boxes. They did not supply the entire amount of their contract, but I think it was 60, well, almost 70%.
And just to your question, your answer right before this, it's my understanding that on your website, you have a list of the suppliers, but not the nonprofits.
Not yet,
They
right,
supplied
that
to.
we don't have the nonprofits. We have the list of the folks.
I would like to see the nonprofits that were supplied.
Okay, we'll have to compile that. It's many, many thousands.
Okay. I yield back. Thank you. I would now recognize Mr. Conaway for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I've got a letter here from Borden Company, which is located in Dallas and services an awful lot of Texas. I'd like to read a couple of the comments. When COVID-19 began making its impact in the U.S., Borden lost approximately 30% of its business virtually overnight due to school and restaurant closures. The contract Borden has awarded through the Farmers to Family Food Box Program enabled us to preserve employment benefits and employment for our people. The opportunity has reinvigorated our employees to fulfill this important mission of providing nutrition to America's families. Also states, most importantly, Borden has supplied our scheduled donations for nearly 1,000 charitable organizations across the country. By August 31st, we anticipate we'll provide more than 11 million free gallons of milk to people in need. Borden, by the way, is in reorganizing bankruptcy organization at the same time. They're fulfilling this wonderful work. Actually, I'm just going to sit, Madam Chairman, to submit the record, the letter, and the various social media praises, photos from recipient organizations. Thank you, ma'am. Secretary Ibaugh, you said that there was a survey done of the contractors on the 22nd, 26th of June. Has the department given any thought to surveying recipient entities? Those that the chair lady has asked to give you a list of, have you going to survey those folks to see what insights you might get from them?
So I think as we've had the program develop, we have been open to input from the recipient organizations, the food banks, as well as the nonprofits and faith-based organizations. And we have worked with them to help them understand what our contractors are required to do under their contracts. And in some cases, that has helped smooth some of the misunderstandings about the delivery and the coordination between the contractors and those recipients.
All right. Do you think a survey of those folks would be helpful?
Yes, we can continue to do that,
Okay.
and that would be helpful.
I'm sure the clock's not running, but I'll ask one more real quick question. Dr. Ibaugh, the vaccine bank recently announced some activity there. Would you give us a quick summary? I know that's off topic, but would you give us a quick summary since I've got you?
Yep,
Would you give us a
we
quick
announced
summary
that
on
we invested about $27.1 million of the sums that you had made available in the 2018 Farm Bill. With that, we purchased 47 million doses of foot and mouth vaccine. During the negotiation process, we were able to extend the effective date on the vaccine from 5 years to 10 years. So we feel that we almost got a twofer in our purchase there.
So that was code for the shelf life of the vaccines won't expire while they sit on our shelves. You'll rotate that stock through so that you maintain extended the life already, but then at the end of 10 years, that when you'll have some program in place to use what was there.
Yep, and we've worked with them and have something that we feel very, very good about.
All right, thank you, Madam Chairman. Now you go back.
Thank you very much. Mr. McGovern, Mr. McGovern, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it. Let me just state at the outset that even before this COVID-19 public health crisis, we had a hunger problem in the United States of America. And since the onset of the crisis, that hunger problem has gotten a whole hell of a lot worse. In Massachusetts, where I represent, before the COVID-19 public health crisis, more than 600,000 people experienced food insecurity. Recent projections from Feeding America estimate somewhere in the excess of 940,000 people. But despite the Northeast region representing one of the highest numbers of COVID-19 cases in the country and 10% of the country's population, we received the second lowest allocation of any geographic region, only $46 million or 4.4% of the total $1.2 billion made in the first round of USDA's distributions, and only $57.5 million, less than 4% of the total $1.5 billion awarded by USDA in the second round of distribution. So, Mr. Summers, on July 2nd, the Food Bank of Western Massachusetts, which I represent, wrote you a letter listing some of the challenges that they've experienced with the Farmers to Families program. Are you familiar with the letter at all?
Yeah, we are familiar with this is Undersecretary Ibaugh, and I'll take this question, but if you will indulge me, we're familiar with some of the communication that we've received. We also are familiar with the fact that we did not have as many offers from the Northeast region of the United States as we had hoped that we would. And so that is partially why we were unable to award larger sums to the northeastern portion of the United States. We did invest $218 million to try to address areas that we felt were underserved through direct contracting, where we reached out to suppliers to try to enhance the Farmers to Families food box program in the Northeast. We also, this isn't the only program that we run.
I have 5 minutes and I get cut off. So with respect, I mean, I think the view in my state in New England is that we were not sufficiently provided with the food that, quite frankly, we needed. And so maybe my question should be, how does AMS process feedback from food banks and contractors on how the Farmers to Families program is going? I mean, what has AMS done to facilitate communication between contractors and food banks to make sure that the program is working as intended? Because the goal here should be to make sure no one goes hungry. Now, before the pandemic, my criticism of the administration was that they were indifferent to the plight of people who are hungry in this country. I still feel that way. And here's a program that's supposed to provide some relief, and yet it didn't live up to its expectation. I will associate myself with the remarks of Mr. Peterson by saying, we ought to be expanding SNAP at this particular point. Unfortunately, that's become a political football with this administration. But if you could answer my question, I mean, how do you process this, and how do you communicate with food banks, and how do you know whether or not areas are being shortchanged?
So we are going to have a new announcement of availability of proposals that we're going to announce later this week. That will make available $500 to $700 million additional dollars. We plan to host a webinar to help contractors that would be making proposals understand the rules, and we hope by doing that, we will encourage more participation in the northeast part of the United States. We also hope to make food available to the northeastern portion of the United States through our trade mitigation purchases that are made available for food banks to order the food that they need and that they anticipate they need. And we also are working as partners with FNS as they invest the $850 million of additional funding to purchase food that Congress allocated FNS through the coronavirus relief programs that, again, are distributed based on the orders that we receive from the states and the food bank system.
You've received the letter from the food bank, and I'm sure from others from the Northeast. I mean, do you do follow-up? Have you talked to these people? Have you tried to work with them to, see where where some of the challenges are? I mean, the bottom line is hunger in this country, food insecurity is exploding. This is a humanitarian crisis. And, and again, any little crumbs that we can get from the administration to try to address this, we want to make sure that we're utilizing it. And I appreciate we'll do a webinar at some point, but have you been in touch with the Food Bank of Western Massachusetts, or have you contacted any of the food banks in the Northeast? Given the fact that I think we could all acknowledge that that what was necessary to get there in order to try to make a dent into this problem didn't get there. I mean, is there direct communication like that, or is it just tune into a webinar on a date certain?
So definitely USDA has multiple mission areas that are working on hunger. FNS would work more directly with those food banks to assess their needs, to help them understand the food that's available, to request and purchase, and as well as AMS would then purchase the food that is being offered and being offered to and ordered by those food banks. So yes, we're working directly with food banks as well as state feeding programs to understand what their needs are.
Thank you. Mr. Bacon, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to just also note here that Mr. Eibach is from Nebraska, one of our favorite sons, so thank you for being here today. You may have mentioned this, but I had to go vote twice, so I apologize if you're repeating this. Can you just explain a little bit how the farmers are compensated? How do you determine the compensation for each box? How does that work?
So most of the food boxes are put together by distributors or contractors that had experience in distributing food. Obviously, that's mostly, in most cases, not a farmer himself. But it has been encouraged and was part of the solicitation that they try to source food products locally or regionally. And so those distributors that are putting together the food boxes would reach out to the farmers themselves to purchase the items to put in the box.
So it tends to be a standard rate for whatever the food is.
Yeah, they would probably go to the marketplace and look at what the price was and what the farmer was asking for that.
Is there a particular favorite with the recipients? Is there like the fastest moving kind of produce, or what's the best ticket item?
So as I've been to Montana, I've been to Philadelphia, I've been to New Jersey, and I've been to Ohio and looked at food boxes. The Secretary has been even more places and looked at food boxes. There is huge variety. I looked at one in Cleveland yesterday that was being put together that had 15 different items in it. Those items vary each week that they put the box together, and so there's great variety between fruits and vegetables in most of these boxes. And then as we move into the dairy products, I also saw a box that had fluid milk, cottage cheese, several different flavors of block cheese, as well as yogurt, and so a lot of variety.
One last question. Have you heard concerns from like the local grocers? Does this impact their business? Because you have the access to food or the SNAP program, so is there a little bit of give and take here, or what kind of feedback are you getting?
So actually there has been some concern, especially in the dairy sector, as the dairy sector struggled at the time that we had milk being wasted. And so the way the program was designed and the prices that were reflected for cheese and milk at that time were very low. As the distribution system has adjusted and demand has remained strong at retail, the price of cheese has steadily increased. And so the box program actually provides an opportunity for contractors to come to USDA and say, hey, the retail market is demanding this product. Can we adjust our box? And we have a process to go through to allow that to happen.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming in, and good to see one of our favorite sons here. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you very much. The chair now recognizes Ms. Adams for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, we can hear
Well,
you.
thank you, Chair Fudge and Ranking Member Johnson for holding the hearing. And Undersecretary, thank you for being here. First, let me thank you for the work on this program. Food banks in my district have received over 1 million pounds of food so far. We have a lot of struggling families there. But it's urgent that we help Americans facing food insecurity and farmers who are hurting because of this pandemic. And that's what the program aims to do. So I do have a few questions to ensure that USDA is working to incorporate feedback from folks on the ground. Now, according to USDA's website, 44 contracts have been issued for the Southeast region so far, totaling about $364 million. And North Carolina vendors only received 5 of those contracts, totaling about $8 million, which is about 2% of the funding for our region. At the same time, contracts, totaling $155 million, were given to vendors headquartered in states well outside of our region, like Washington, Pennsylvania, and Colorado. So my first question is, did the USDA's contracting process include any consideration for sourcing from nearby vendors, keeping foods within or close to their home state or region?
So yes, the contracting process did emphasize or encourage producers or contractors to source food locally, as well as from small and medium-sized producers or farmers, if you will. And so there was a provision for that. Thank you.
Okay, well, nonprofits and food banks participating in the program in my state, they've told me that they're having to pay for the storage and the delivery of perishable foods that they receive. So unlike TFAP, this program is providing food without covering any administrative costs. And so that leaves a lot of food banks high and dry, especially those servicing smaller areas with less existing capacity to store large quantities of food. So to what extent is USDA able to assist nonprofits and food banks with these challenges, such as the ability to store perishable foods and procure transportation to pick up the food boxes?
So under this program, the food banks and the nonprofits actually are in the driver's seat and have the power to refuse delivery, or and it's incumbent upon the contractor to work with the food bank to be able to take deliveries when they're able to either distribute the food directly or when they have the storage ability.
Okay. Does USDA have a mechanism in place for nonprofit food banks to provide complaints or feedback about the suppliers that they're working with?
So we many different points of entry for people to be able to supply USDA with feedback about the program, and we actually welcome the feedback that we would receive because we want to continue to improve the program, and in some cases the feedback has allowed us to reach out to the contractor to remind them of their responsibility under the contract to work more directly and in a more accommodating fashion with the recipient of the boxes.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hagedorn, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate that. It's great to see the witnesses, Mr. Secretary. Just since you're here, I want to reiterate that what you know, that our farmers, particularly in southern Minnesota, I can attest, have been going through tough times since they closed down the restaurants and the futures markets went through the tank and the packing plants were disrupted. So I appreciate what you and the department and the secretary of everybody's doing to help them, but we need to do more. And I think we're all committed to that. So keep working with you on that. We have a regional food bank, Channel 1, in our district that's distributed about $370,000 worth of food to people. This program is working for folks. And I can also testify on some of the senior nutrition programs that they're working. I was just in Austin less than a couple weeks ago helping to distribute meals at lunch, and they're getting out 500 or more meals just in Austin, Minnesota every day. So making a big difference, and we appreciate it. One of the folks that's been involved in this is Northview Church, which distributes meals into Minnesota, I think into the Chairman Peterson's district. But they write, one result of these events has been the founding of Reach of the Heart, a service-minded entity through which we recently distributed 75,000 pounds of food to those in need of our community, all because of the food provided by farmers to families. These events conducted in June went a long way toward promoting community unity at a time when civil unrest was stirring in our area. I was pleased that we were able to distribute food to diverse groups, including those who came to the United States from Nepal, Haiti, Sudan, Ivory Coast, and Bosnia, just to name a few. So, there are some great stories out there of what's being done. I'd like, Madam Chair, to submit this letter for the record, if that's okay. I ask unanimous consent to do that. And there is one specific case, Mr. Secretary, that's come before me that I'd like an explanation, and it has to do with a vendor in San Antonio. Can you walk me through that a little bit and tell me how that one was handled, and maybe some of the facts that are out there aren't exactly accurate?
So I would assume that you're referencing the contractor that the chairwoman has referenced several times as well. And so with that assumption, I won't necessarily say the name. But yes, we became aware of the concern that surfaced among Congress, among the media about that contractor. We spent time with that contractor to make sure that we re-verified that they were capable of trying to fulfill their contract. We visited their facilities and talked to the management of that group. And as a result of that, they had the opportunity to deliver up to 750,000 boxes. They did deliver 500,000 boxes. They were only paid for the amount of boxes that they actually delivered. And so the fact that they maybe came up a little bit short on their numbers, they were not rewarded financially for not delivering those boxes.
I appreciate the clarification on that. And this is like a lot of different programs that have been authorized and appropriated here recently. Obviously, we had a crisis situation. We put things together. Rules are written very quickly. We're trying to get whether it's money or food out the door and help the American people. And it's good to know that you're going to provide the type of oversight that we need on this to make this right as we move forward. So thank you. Appreciate your testimony, and I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Dr. Schreier. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. And Undersecretary Ibach, thank you so much for having the conversation with me back in April about specialty crops. I very much appreciated that, and I appreciate your being here today with us. I also want to say that in my state, farmers and food banks very much appreciate this program. That said, it is very hard to do a program this big from 30,000 feet, and that's really where my questions are going today. I recently spoke to a medium-sized co-op who has a contract in my state, and he indicated that the USDA is by far his largest customer, and that the Farmers to Families Food Box Program is keeping the bills paid for dozens of their grower members, and that is fantastic. The issue he wanted to raise was the issue of pricing. The price of a box depends on what's in it and the transportation and the storage, which incentivizes essentially if you have a distributor in Seattle, they can price much more competitively if they only deliver within 50 miles of Seattle, which really leaves our rural communities disadvantaged once again. And so I was wondering that in order to serve our rural communities and still take into account pricing for these distributors, whether the USDA will give any consideration to changing that policy, or at least to look at distance traveled in evaluating that.
So that definitely, and the first phase one, pricing wasn't our number one consideration because we realized that there were going to be, in rural areas especially, more costs associated with that distribution. Storage and distribution is something that the contractor is able to build into their box price. When I was in Cleveland yesterday, one of the participants, Weir Farms, actually gave $1 per box to the food bank itself, or their cooperator that was to aid in the distribution. So, and that was an eligible expense to be bid into the process. So definitely delivery and storage, and that's why we didn't want to necessarily have them compete against each other just based on price, because that would have made it more difficult for those rural areas to be served. And so we want to continue to try to make sure we're getting value, but not eliminate people, because the overhead costs do vary across
So here's
the US.
another quick question about overhead, is that a lot of the small to medium farmers don't have the GAP certification, and they would love to participate. I mean, if the idea is to keep food local and support our small farmers, would you give consideration to not having to have that GAP certification?
So one of our major concerns was maintaining food safety throughout this process. The worst thing that could happen is that we have a food safety slip through this and make people ill as a result of our distribution program. So we tried to enforce the same food safety standards that we had in place for other feeding programs to keep that consistency and also make sure we kept that standard available. And I think we would want to continue to elevate food safety as we move through this.
That makes sense. If I could ask one more thing, that's one of the reasons actually that I introduced a bill called the Farmers Feeding Families Coronavirus Response Act, which really gets the state in there. So you could have the non-GAP certified farmers, the small, medium, farmers market type farmers involved. And you could bring this down to the state level where they really are used to dealing with small farmers, small food banks. If the program is really about helping food stay local, working with local and small growers and regional distributors, can we give more of this responsibility and ownership to the states? Because I know Washington State Department of Agriculture could be a very nimble aid in distributing these boxes.
And I worked at the beginning of the program with Director Sanderson, and we had some conversations about how he might be able to reach out to some of the people that were awarded contracts to be able to help them understand who in their vicinity might be able to supply them, to try to connect those small and medium-sized farmers or the farmers market vendors to those programs, and continue to want to do that. There are various programs that USDA has that we're trying to implement and use to cover the whole need that is out there, because the need for food is great.
Thank you. I would love to help our small farmers. Thank you very much. Yield back.
I now recognize Mr. Davis for 5 minutes. Thank you. I guess I recognize myself for 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Eibach, for being here today. I come from the state of Connecticut, and we've been one of the states that was hit hard by COVID-19 in the very early stages. We've seen over 400,000 cases of the virus and over 4,000 deaths in my state. In addition to threatening the health of our residents, COVID-19 has decimated our economy and further destabilized Americans' steady access to nutritious meals. Early in the pandemic, I heard from farmers in my district that they were having to dump milk and discard other products due to business interruption with restaurants and school districts. At the same time, I was hearing from food banks that lines were stretching around buildings while donations were dwindling. The Farmers to Families Food Box program was billed as a solution to this pressing issue, a way for farmers experiencing those difficulties to partner with food banks and ensure families were fed. In my district, it is home to many small farmers rather than the large industrial farm operations that we often hear about. Although our farms have great relationships with local food banks, they were completely left out of this program for a variety of foreseeable reasons. First, not only did the department's application process have a very short turnaround time for interested contractors, but they conducted a regional open competition process in order to select those contractors once they applied. Mr. Eibach, why did the department decide to have a completely open regional competition process rather than one with set-asides for small farmers, minority farmers, or new and beginning farmers who were disproportionately suffering due to the economic crisis of COVID-19?
So implementing the program in a speedy fashion was one of our major considerations because of the crisis that we were hearing from the fruit and vegetable industry about the waste of food occurring there, as well as the waste of milk and dairy products that was occurring. And so while our program, we conducted webinars and the opportunities to try to inform people about the parameters of becoming involved with the program, it did proceed very quickly, and we know that there were people that weren't able to react fast enough to be able to embrace the program. And we're going to open again another bid process at the end of this week, and we are going to, we are committed to trying to provide informational sessions to be able to help more people be able to bid competitively.
Okay, good. Is there any opportunity for either set-asides or consideration for small farmers, or especially in the Northeast regions like I'm talking about, because an open competition process is just disproportionate when you think about it as a regional effort?
Within the bidding and selection and evaluation process, there was priority given to those contractors that talked about sourcing local and embracing the agriculture that was near their vicinity. So while that wasn't a set aside, we believe it somewhat influenced that ability for those smaller farmers. But no, we weren't able to provide a set aside during that first bid process.
So considering that only about 4% of small farms received the access to the program, have you considered doing anything differently with your application process, or even the way, I know initially you said the turnout was low, but now that you've seen the problems, I mean, I understand we tried to implement a lot of things very quickly, but now that we've identified the problems, in the next rollout, have you specifically addressed any of the challenges that are faced by farmers in my community or small farmers across the United States?
I think we have tried to adjust the program and the contracting process to be able to meet some of the problems that we identified. We still will not be able to go so far as to be able to implement a set aside in the time that we have available to get food to people.
And I guess just the last thing I say, we've heard a lot of conversation about it today, but I recognize the efforts of the department to solve a problem that was happening in real time, but you have to understand the concern that we are experiencing when we see that a wedding planner received funds or access to the program when local farmers with established relationships to food bank were left out of consideration. So I just hope that in the next phase or even moving forward, that now that we've seen it and we've experienced it, that we can work hard to mitigate the problem and ensure it doesn't happen again.
Yes, and we appreciate that, and we will do that. But also part of the program was to be able to make access available to the most amount of people to enter into the program, because we knew that the need was great for people to participate, to be able to distribute as much food as possible.
Thank you. I yield back. I now recognize Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and appreciate the opportunity to be here. Sorry I wasn't ready right off the bat, but here I am. Pull my notes out, and I want to tell you, though, Mr. Secretary, it's been great to talk to you via conference call during this pandemic, talk about what the Farmers to Family Food Box Program has done. I was very proud to see when the first boxes arrived at the Taylorville Food Pantry in my hometown of Taylorville, that we immediately put it out on social media. And I can tell you personally, and you've heard me say this to you via phone call, that the line at the Taylorville Food Pantry in my hometown of 11,000 people has grown exponentially throughout this pandemic. I can't go into town from where I live without driving by and seeing that line on the days that they're distributing. So we appreciate the investment, and we appreciate the opportunity to talk about it here. Also in my district, Vermilion Valley, Central Illinois Produce was awarded a contract that has since been extended. It's provided approximately 350,000 boxes to tens of thousands of families filled with locally grown produce and dairy from nearby producers like Ropp Cheese in Bloomington, Illinois, and also Prairie Farms in my district. John Rollins, their president and CEO, wrote a letter to the chair and the ranking member of this committee outlining the many successes of the program. And I'd like to ask unanimous consent to submit this letter in its entirety for the record.
So ordered.
Thank you. These contracts have allowed Vermilion Valley to hire back workers who were laid off due to the lack of business and to state-mandated closures, and also allowed many of our local nonprofits to continue their outreach in our local communities too. Separately, I recently introduced a bill called the Meals on Wheels for Kids Act, which, like Farmers to Families, would innovate the way we carry out existing programs by creating more partnerships between existing community organizations to deliver healthy meals to kids during the summer months, especially in rural areas who live miles away from the congregate sites that you've helped to establish. So with that in mind, I think these are some innovative solutions that we need. And Undersecretary Ibach, quick question. What are your plans to continue the program? And I know everybody's probably asked what type of funding measures that we can put forth, but how does this program going into the future, past this pandemic, how does it coincide with our congregate programs? And how can we provide the long-term sustainable funding to continue to get box foods like this and really integrate it with our senior Meals on Wheels programs so that we have the volunteers and we have the outreach already getting in to some of our most underserved, inaccessible areas. There's no more time that we've seen the importance of feeding hungry kids. Let's make sure we develop the plans to do it after the pandemic too.
So the funding to pay for the Farmers to Families Food Box Program came as a result of the Families First Act that was the second coronavirus relief program that Congress passed. In that, Congress provided USDA funds as necessary to implement programs to feed Americans that were in need. We feel, and I think Congress, you would feel the same way, that money expires with the fiscal year. And so the $3 billion that we've invested or committed or asked for so far, $3 million, of which about $900,000 was actually requested in payment. We had another about the same amount of money that is in the second phase that has been authorized, and we plan on trying to take bids to fulfill or invest the rest of the money that would have food boxes going out through the month of October. After that, we wouldn't have funding available without authorization from Congress.
Okay, well, I understand that. On an annual basis, you're going to get an appropriations, but how can we work together to make the feeding programs in a post-pandemic work even better, especially in the rural areas where we know so many kids are still left behind because they don't have that congregate opportunity? Let's continue to work together to come up with some solutions, because it's not about just feeding kids who can come to the congregate centers, which do a great job in my larger communities. But I know there are a lot of communities that don't have gas stations, they don't have grocery stores, and they don't have food in their fridge when those kids are home for the summer. So let's work together and integrate some existing programs. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Panetta for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate this opportunity to be here to have this hearing. Gentlemen, thanks for being here. Appreciate it as well. Thank you for dealing with the ups and downs of this pandemic, be it this hearing, be it the administration of the CFAP. So I appreciate that. Secretary Ibach, it was good to talk to you about a month ago, where we were able to talk about the CFAP and the USDA's release of the CFAP. So I appreciate that opportunity. I'm also glad that both of you are here today so that we can obviously learn more about how the USDA has administered the purchase component of the CFAP. Now, and that being obviously the Families to Farmers Food Box program. So given the obvious unfortunate realities of this pandemic, that box was obviously heartened many people, and we had high hopes for it. However, from my conversations, as you're hearing today, and as I'm sure you've heard over and over, there are some significant issues that clearly need to be addressed, and that's why I appreciate having this opportunity to talk to you today. But obviously, as my good friend Mr. Davis just said, we want to be able to work with you on it to make it better, because we do know that there is a lot of potential there for it to be better and for it to help so many people of all backgrounds. Now, the issue that I've heard over and over is based on the fact that this program is centered around distributors, and this has led to some serious issues, logistical issues, as well as some issues of equity as well. And by asking distributors to reach out to food banks and other nonprofits, it seems that there are certain vulnerable communities, or most vulnerable, that weren't getting the necessary distribution of these types of benefits. In some cases, we felt like we were working against rather than with existing local relationships, and that led to a failing to address critical last-mile issues to ensure that the food actually got from the farmer to the family. But like I said, I do appreciate all the work that you have put into this program, and I do want to work to help to share some stories from my communities and ultimately make this program better and stronger. I think we all do, and that's definitely one of the main purposes of this hearing. Undersecretary Ibach, can you speak to how USDA worked to ensure equitable access to this program, not just across regions, but within certain communities?
So I think that's an area that, in the speed that we tried to roll out the program, with putting emphasis on the things we did, the capability of actually the contractor to pack a food box, acquire food, pay for food, and do that, and expected them to identify those people to distribute through or to work with through the distribution, that some contractors did a great job of trying to blanket the area, others, pick the easy fruit, and that is an area that we could work together with the contractors as we identify people that want to participate, to try to point them in the future and do better there.
Was there any sort of focus on underserved areas and how you would actually distribute to those particular areas?
Probably not specifically the way you're asking. Once we did see the contracts that were awarded and evaluated where they plan to distribute, we were able to identify regions of the country or states or parts of states that were underserved. And so we took steps. We allocated just recently 16 different contracts representing $218 million that we directly went out and made direct contracting with, not through an offer system, to say, please serve those areas.
I got you. So the program is not formula-based, correct?
No.
Okay. Now, is it possible, and you may not have this now, but could you provide a breakdown of the funding that went to each food bank or nonprofit within each region?
So we would be able to provide a breakdown very easily of which contractors participated in the program. We would have to go to the contracts themselves to extract the specific food bank or nonprofit that received those. If they were enumerated in the contract, they could have just been enumerated as eligible recipients, but we could do polling to figure out who all receive food.
Understood. Now, one thing I've realized in going out and visiting each of my food banks basically every week and helping with the food distribution is not all food banks, even in my district, are the same. I mean, some have, like Monterey County has a food bank, a food cold storage of 30,000 feet capacity, whereas San Benito County doesn't have one nearly close to that big. Did you guys take that into account in working with distributors and how they would bring certain types of food to certain food banks?
So one of the things that we've identified as something that we need to continue to work on is communicating to the food banks or to the recipients of the boxes that they actually have the power within this equation to tell the person that is contracting with us to put together the food box what they want, when they want it, and how they'll take it. They do not have to provide the cold storage or the last mile distribution if they don't want to, but it would affect the ability of the contractor to put together the number of boxes they offered us, and they are only paid based on the boxes that they actually deliver successfully.
Understood. I'm out
Thank
of time.
you.
Gentlemen, thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Thompson's not with us. Mr. Scott, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Gentlemen, thank you for being here today. And I want to tell you, I think more has gone right than wrong with the food distribution in the last several months. Nobody could have prepared for this unless they had already been through it before, and we haven't been through this before. I want to give a lot of credit to a couple of people. Chef V in Tift County Schools, Ms. Vanessa Hayes, she did a wonderful job of keeping people fed. We've also got a great mission there called Peanut Butter and Jesus. Tony McBrayer would be embarrassed that I mentioned his name with that, but I will tell you in Tift County, and I think the key to feeding, especially the kids, was the coordination among the school systems and the other not-for-profits that were out there working. And so if you had a community that was close within walking distance to a school in Tift County, those who had vehicles and were would carry the food into the other communities. And that's something that I'm very proud of my hometown and my local community for how they work together with the school system and the other not-for-profits to carry out the mission. Also proud of Second Harvest. I know something was said about the accuracy of the food box distribution, and obviously this is a pretty big food bank, and when they pack those boxes, they're packed with canned fruits, canned vegetables, rice, other things, all that we would buy on and feed our family, but not necessarily. But it wasn't fresh. It was all packaged. One of the things that they asked for and were given that helped expedite the food delivery was the simple waiver of the signature when they hand somebody a box, that you don't have to sign saying that you're eligible. And I can tell you, as many people as we had in my part of the world that were needing those boxes were literally, we had the Georgia National Guard out handing out the boxes, the ability to hand the family the box and then to let them drive on off in their vehicle, it helped expedite the process. So whatever the error rate may be is much offset by how fast it allowed us to get people the food. And I can tell you the majority of the people in those lines that were long enough would not have waited had they not needed the food, whether they were technically eligible for it or not. So I appreciate that. The difference I see in the fresh fruit, the farmer's market boxes, that's exactly what anybody with unlimited resources, if they went into the fanciest grocery store in America, would buy and take home to feed their family. And so I looked at those boxes, went to Atlanta with Secretary Perdue. I was very proud of what was happening there too. At the same time, it breaks my heart to know that dairy farmers that I know were dumping thousands of gallons of milk. Vegetable farmers were literally couldn't get paid enough for the labor to harvest the crops. And what I think we have to do is recognize we've had a tremendous supply chain breakdown in this country, and we need to make sure that we learn from that. And I want to say one final thing. The American farmer gets about 10 cents on the dollar of what we spend on our groceries. When you look at the price of the current commodities that are sitting out there today, I think that we have the potential of widespread bankruptcies among the American farmers over the next several months if something is not done in the next coronavirus package. Corn is $3 a bushel. I mean, 5 years ago, it was $6. If you look at the price of cotton, if you look at every single commodity group out there, everything we eat starts with a farmer. And of what has been done in the $4 trillion that has been either done by the Fed or done by us in Congress, the American farmer, of that $4 trillion, it was somewhere around $20 billion total. Now you do that math, and that comes out to about 0.5%, if I'm not mistaken. And so I'm very concerned that as we go forward through the end of the year, if there's not a bounce back in commodity prices and we haven't done something as Congress, that we're going to go into the 2021 year with a lot fewer farmers and a lot fewer people planting those crops that we depend on, regardless of what your income level is. With that, Madam Chair, I appreciate what you've done. I appreciate this committee and the work on feeding people. And I look forward, I hope that we learn from the challenges that we've been through.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Costa, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman, for this important subcommittee hearing and to be sitting in on it. Just to take off on our last colleague's comments, in the HEROES Act, we do have an additional $16.5 billion to provide support, which would put us, the way I added numbers up, from what we've done thus far, about $40 billion in total, although I've told the Secretary of Agriculture, Secretary Perdue, that I think somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 plus as we try to do a safety net over the next year, because this is going to last for the next year. Anybody who thinks otherwise is fooling themselves, I think. Included in that is funding for farm workers for safety, and those workers, essential workers, all of them, in our food processing facilities, whether they be our meat, poultry, or whether they be in packing houses or other processing facilities. Without the workers, we can't provide food on America's dinner table, and we must be mindful of that. The workers are essential, and we know the problems. But I want to talk about the issue of the regional disparities with the food box program. We think in the West there has been not as much access to meat and dairy. Half the West allocation was in fresh produce. Of course, we grow half the nation's fresh produce, so that's to be understood. But we're also in California the #1 dairy state with 20% of the dairy production. I've had anecdotally hearing some people say in the box programs that, well, we produce a great deal of milk products, that they're selling milk there that's produced in Oregon, and I like our Oregonians, but we've had our own supply problems. The contractor contact information publicly available to producers to get in touch and work collaborative with getting the products included in the box, I think has been lacking, even though the program was advertised to help producers in the first place. What under the lessons learned can you see that we could do that? And if there's a second allocation of CFAP 2.0, will that be included in the food box program?
So first of all, to maybe address your question about dairy, you know, that is probably, if we looked at the categories of boxes, that would be the category of boxes that least fulfilled based on what we had allocated to those contractors.
Are we looking to address that in the second round?
And part of that, though, isn't necessarily that they failed to execute their contracts. It's part of it is the marketplace changed, the price of milk and cheese changed, and the retail industry pulled those products out of where they were accessible to our contractors and demanded them in the retail space. And so we need to figure out how we provide the necessary dairy products, but also not disrupt the regular marketplace. And so we're working on that, and we continue to want to do that.
And we have experiences where we have large experienced packers and shippers that have tried to apply, but we've only had one mid-sized shipper that got a contract in our area. Are you trying to provide greater opportunities for that to happen?
So I think that's partly providing more time for people to apply and to put together their proposals. Also, we plan to do at least 2 webinars, I believe, in the upcoming bid process to help people understand the program. I think some of the
time's going. How about under the good agricultural practices, that certification progress? Many find it burdensome for farmers to get a chance to participate.
GAP certification is part of a food safety concern that we have to make sure that we continue to assure that any products distributed
You're looking to make
would be
any
safe.
Adjustments?
I think that food safety will continue to be a priority and
It should
emphasis.
be. Yeah, I don't think anybody disagrees there. On the USDA requirement program, the offer should describe how to intend to engage small farmers for those farms servicing local and regional interests. My concern is that there really hasn't been metrics that have been engaged here, and I don't know how you can reevaluate the effort without some level of metrics to just evaluate how and what assurances are provided. What are you looking for in trying to develop in this next effort?
So as some of the other panel members have asked, we didn't do set-asides for small or medium. We set some incentives within the contracting process for them to source locally, which we thought would help with that. But the main focus of the program was to put a program together quickly that got food out quickly, and so attending to all those details wasn't possible.
But you're looking at which farmers are helping in what region by region basis in terms of trying to, make sure that that product is being availed?
We tried to set within the contracting parameters encouragement for them to source locally when possible. Understanding that, at the time that the program started, California and the South had great access to crops that were growing in the fields. The northern part of the U.S., obviously, their season is behind. They didn't have the same access at that time.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. Thank you, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Kelly, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The ranking member mentioned Borden Dairy. I want to bring light to the fact that Extra Table, an organization in Mississippi, relayed that this is the first year in its history that it was able to provide fresh milk to the food banks and soup kitchens it serves throughout Mississippi. First and foremost, Mr. Undersecretary, thank you for taking the time to come to my home state in November of 2018 and 2019. We appreciate your time and interest in the commodities that we grow in Mississippi. I also appreciate you taking time to be here today. Farmers to Families works, and my colleagues have pointed this out repeatedly. I would like to switch gears and talk a little bit about other areas of CFAP that are important to my state. We appreciate the work that USDA is doing to implement the intent of Congress in helping our farmers and ranchers feeling the impact of COVID-19 on their operations throughout CFAP. This program has been a lifeline for many farms that have been dealt a horrible blow. One of your USDA mission agencies, Agricultural Marketing Services, is heavily involved in working with the Farm Service Agency as they implement the specialty crop segment of this important program. The sweet potato industry in Mississippi is a major economic engine in our state, located mostly in my congressional district. Many of my sweet potato farmers had contracts to sell the 2019 crops to wholesalers and restaurants that were canceled before the April 15 due to the impact of coronavirus. And now they have no market to sell these programs. USDA has told these farmers that they do not qualify for CFAP because the potatoes did not perish immediately because they were in storage at the time. As the 2020 crop is quickly approaching, these farmers are about to have to destroy their 2019 crops in storage to make room for their 2020 harvest season. To me, it makes no difference whether it perished at the time or there's no market and we have to throw it away. Can you tell me if USDA will relook this rule and do what's right by my farmers in my district?
So there was the original prices that we were able to analyze to determine loss or damage, and we published those to make those crops eligible. Since then, there has been a NOFA process where different commodities could apply through the NOFA process. I don't know where we're at necessarily. I apologize on sweet potatoes, whether or not their NOFA has been completely analyzed and what determination has been made. I will get back to you with that.
Yeah, and please do, Mr. Secretary, because the net effect is they had potatoes, they store for a long time, but the next crop is coming in, which means they eat the entire year's crop. And so any help, I mean, that meets the intent of what we're trying to do with CFAP. And sometimes on rules and regulations, and we have to look. And listen, I've been in the Army a long time, and I've been around government bureaucracy. And sometimes we look at things, but we have to get to the intent of the law. And I would really appreciate that. I do thank your service. It's working. It's not perfect. But I appreciate you being on the conference calls and being here today and visiting my state. You guys are doing a great job. Just keep it up. And let's, as an old general told me a long time ago, General Scott, who was the Assistant Division Commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, he said, good, better, best. Good get better and better get best. And Mr. Undersecretary, we hope USDA will keep getting good, better, and best. And thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Spanberger, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Fudge, for allowing me to wave onto the subcommittee today for this important oversight hearing. Mr. Eibach, I want to thank by expressing my appreciation for the speed with which USDA implemented the Farmers to Families Food Box program. Not only has the program alleviated food waste, but it has helped those facing food insecurity receive aid at this critical moment. That said, I am concerned about some of the ways in which this program has been implemented. And on June 15th, I sent a letter to Secretary Perdue regarding the geographic disparities present in the program's rollout during the first wave of contracts. Madam Chair, I ask unanimous consent to enter a copy of that letter and the June 29th response from Secretary Perdue into the record.
Without objection.
Under the first rounds of awards, Virginia received nearly 3 million fewer pounds of food than would have been expected if the program had been administered under the formula utilized by TFAB, which distributes food relief proportionately to a state's needs. While it's my understanding from that the agency is doing more to address these discrepancies, I was concerned to see that not acknowledged as one of the challenges and lessons learned that you identified in your testimony. For my constituents, this issue is a looming one and remains so. And according to USDA provided statistics, Virginia remains near the bottom of states in terms of food delivered per person. I know many of my colleagues have asked about this question so far today, so I don't want to revisit some of the discussion, and I thank you for bringing forward your answers to their questions. But I do want to specifically ask, why did USDA elect not to utilize a need-based formula like the one used under TFAP when distributing this aid?
That's an excellent question, and it was a new program that from inception, or our first thought about it, to when the first food box was being distributed was about 40 days and 40 nights, Bruce likes to say, and with an intended reference there. But so we did it quickly. I think our concern or our wonder was who would apply, would we have a sufficient amount of contractors that wanted to participate in the program. And so rather than set regional or state thresholds, we wanted to be able to get food out. As a commodity farmer, I realize that a bushel of displaced corn, whether it's sold out of Nebraska or sold out of California, is a bushel of displaced corn, and I think it works the same way in the fruit and vegetable industry. And so as we were, our goal was to get food circulating in the system to try to stabilize prices for farmers, to try to stop waste and have food moving as we fed families. And so it was imperfect in its design, but I think our goal and intent was pure and I hope noble.
Thank you very much for that answer. And following up, and to be clear, I appreciate the program very much. It has helped many hungry Americans and as well as farmers and producers. But to follow up on the discussion, and in your answer, you were discussing the concern about who might apply, what contractors might apply to participate in the program. Before the rounds of contracts went out, did USDA conduct any outreach to individual food banks or food bank networks to assess their needs, level of increased demands, or any other concerns? And recognizing the 40 days, 40 nights, now that the program has been implemented, we have a little bit of time and space. What has USDA done since then with any additional outreach to food banks, including those particularly hard impacted, underserved areas?
So we did reach out as we were designing the program to the fruit and vegetable industry, to the dairy industry, to understand how they might perceive this type of a program to work for them. We also worked with them as they reached out to food banks to say, we would like to work with you on this program. We had conversations with food banks as well in that process. We've learned a lot in the input we've had as we've gone through this. Part of it is the education process for understanding that the people receiving the boxes that wanted to participate in distributing the boxes had more power in that process than sometimes they exerted, and so we want them to continue to know that they do have the ability to influence their service and how they're served by accepting or not accepting the boxes.
And Mr. Eibach, thank you for being here. I'm running out of time, but I do want to implore you that in the future to engage a little bit more aggressively than what we've seen in the immediacy of the crisis, particularly with food banks and our food bank networks. From what we're hearing in Virginia, that would be really helpful on the ground. So thank you for your work thus far, and I look forward to seeing greater contact with those entities. Thank you.
We definitely wanted to engage food banks, but we also wanted to provide opportunities for community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, and other organizations that we knew would be in contact with needy people to be able to participate too on a level field with the food bank.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir.
Ms. Pingree, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. First, thank you for holding this hearing. I think it's been a great opportunity to hear how this program has been working. And to Secretary Eibach, thank you for being with us today and to your many answers for questions. I want to just start by saying I share so many of the things that my colleagues have already said and a few other questions too that you've answered. I, like Mr. Peterson, think we should have just done a SNAP increase all along. It would have been more efficient. And certainly it allows more dignity for the families who are allowed to go shopping on their own. I also had hoped that we could have just directed this money to the food banks. I think they're better able to deal with many of the problems that we've been talking about today, and also to make sure when it comes to procuring from the farmers that they know who to get their food from. Maine, as you know, and we've heard from other New Englanders, did not get any food, I think, in the first round, and we're able, thank you, to have another round. And so now we do have 2 contractors serving Maine, but we are still third from the bottom on the list in number of customers served, and that continues to be a concern. I hope that progress can be made in that, given that there are now more contracts. I want to just focus my concern on the farmers. Part of the reason this program is there is because of the huge challenges with the supply chain that many others have mentioned. And the idea was to make sure that farmers who had big surpluses were getting their food into these boxes. Also, as you mentioned, there was criteria in making sure that local farmers were able to participate. We've heard a lot about that not being followed. And so one of my questions is whether you have data on who was actually awarded, who did the contractees purchase from? I know you've said, and I know that was part of the criteria, that they had to look at local and other engaging small farmers, but we don't have any data at this point to know if that happened. Do you collect that data? Is there more information we could receive?
We have not collected that data as part of our verification process at this time. I do know anecdotally when I was at the different places that I visited that actually had a growing season that was harvesting, that there has been an attempt made by those people constructing the boxes to include local fruits and vegetables at that time. The contract does not require them to tell us who they're purchasing the food from. We can survey to be able to, and many of the cooperators and contractors are very cooperative about working with us and being transparent and helping us understand how they put together their boxes. They're very proud of their boxes in many cases. And so we could do some work there over time to help understand that better.
Well, thank you for that response. I guess I would just put in a plug for the committee and to ask for that and for you to consider doing that. And perhaps in future contracts, there would be an appropriate way to have some oversight on that. Because again, this program was based on making sure that where we had surpluses, that food was going to go into these boxes. And in my region, one of the things we're particularly concerned about is we have a lot of small to medium-sized farmers who weren't able to get the direct assistance due to a whole variety of things and the seasonality of their harvest, and so it didn't work into many of the money that came from the USDA. So this seemed like a pretty good opportunity for them to be able to supply this food. So I guess I would encourage you to do that surveying so that we can look into the future, have a better idea of how much local food was accessed, and also to make sure that where there was the greatest need and oversupply, it was going to the right places. Just one other thing that we heard from some of the food banks, because local farmers weren't as engaged, and many of them already procure from local farmers for their food banks and have funding for that, there have been certain amounts of oversupply as the food is now coming in from the food boxes because it's not calculated to sort of take into account what's plentiful in our area at the same time. So I guess I want to mention that. I also just will use my last 20 seconds to just put in a plug for something that other members have asked for, and that's to understand better what nonprofits and food banks did get this food, to make sure that they were all legitimate using criteria. But also I think it would be important information to have out there so that people in need who wanted to access the food banks knew where to go. And since that's not readily available, I hope that that will be something else you provide. With that, I yield back, and I thank you, and I thank again the chair for having this hearing.
Thank you very, very much. We want to thank you for your testimony today. Mr. Johnson, do you have any closing comments?
Yeah, a few things. Thank you, ma'am. First off, I would just say continue to use your audit and accountability functions to make sure that we're getting a good result. I mean, I have heard from the field concerns about that last mile delivery system by the distributor, particularly in rural areas. I think some of these folks bit off maybe a bit more than they realized, so continue to make progress on that. For my colleagues that are calling for that we shouldn't have done this box program, we should have done SNAP. Well, SNAP is a tremendous program, and it has a huge role to play here. But I think it's important during these unprecedented emergency times that we deploy a diverse set of tools. SNAP is incredibly helpful. We know that SNAP has scaled. We know that 6 million more people got on SNAP from February to, I think, April, and we know the spend is up. So SNAP can meet a portion of this demand, but it can't meet it all, because we've been talking about farmers dumping milk. They weren't dumping milk because there wasn't demand. They were dumping milk because traditional distribution systems were broken. As we've talked about, the food supply chain was strained and in some ways broken. And that, if we wanted to reduce food waste, and we do, and if we want to drive down hunger, and we do, we couldn't just rely on the same grocery store system that was strained and was breaking. And so to those of you at USDA, you provided another diverse set, or another opportunity to help producers and to help hungry Americans. And you talk about 40 days and 40 nights, and as you alluded to, some of those nights probably were working nights rather than resting nights. And in the days since then, your efforts have made a real impact. I'll just close by saying this. There is still tremendous economic uncertainty in farm and ranch country and throughout America for families. That economic uncertainty is lower today than it would have been, but not for your efforts. So thank you.
Thank you. And I will close as well. I just am confused about the people who sit on the other side of the aisle. They're just being so nice about there's no accountability. We have no idea whether these people have done what they were supposed to do. But they're all, I mean, I am just, it doesn't cease to amaze me, the hypocrisy that I listen to. When I ask about accountability in another program, they'll say it's freedom, just freedom. So now, that doesn't count when people are hungry or needy, this whole freedom idea. So we talk about less government. Now we have more government than we have ever had. We create a whole nother bureaucracy. We tell them what they can and cannot eat in SNAP. Now we're going to give them what we want to give them in boxes. So I am confused. I really am, because I do not understand how they can sit here straight-faced and tell you how wonderful this is. We have no idea what you are doing, nor do you, because you can't answer the questions. So I would just suggest, if we're going to continue to do this program, at least be able to give us some answers. Who's getting the food? Are they giving them rotten food, which is what I'm hearing in some of these instances? Are you paying for somebody to really give it to people that should have it? We have none of those answers. This is fraught with waste, fraud, and abuse. And so I'm just hopeful as we go forward, you can at least give us some of the answers we ask you for today, and understand that even people who are poor or who are hungry still have dignity. And they should be allowed to buy and feed their families what they choose. And so I would think that you might want to think about maybe just increasing SNAP a little bit more. We have kids who are not in school. Not that I think it probably is that bad, because you don't allow us to put nutritious food into schools, but we want less government. With that, I will close and end this panel. Thank you so much.
Cooper?
Resume?
I would assume so.
We hope so, right? Yeah, that was interesting discussion.
I'll say. You all right.
Yeah.
No, anybody that clicks on here can hear.
The subcommittee will stand at recess pending technical issues.
Oh. Technical issues.
All right.
Are you back?
Should we go back on mute?
Yep. I'm going to.
The recess has ended. The hearing will come to order. Oh. Mr. Cooper?
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, thank you. Please begin with your testimony.
You bet. Thank you, distinguished members of the committee. My name's Eric Cooper. I'm the president, CEO of the San Antonio Food Bank. I'm one of the food banks in the Feeding America and Feeding Texas food bank networks. I serve a large section of Southwest Texas where I have the privilege of partnering with well over 500 different nonprofit charities, of which the majority are faith-based organizations. We also work with school districts and other organizations in feeding pre-COVID about 60,000 people each week. Now, at the onset of the COVID-19 crisis, that number moved to 120,000 people a week. Now, we feed those families through our partner pantries and then our pop-up distributions. It's these pop-up distributions that the truck-to-trunk model was based on. They're significant events and take lots of logistics. You could imagine the coordination of bringing some extra gas and gas cans for cars that run out of fuel, jumper cables for cars that break down, making sure that you've got hydration stations in the heat of South Texas, porta potties, lots and lots of volunteers, and then serving thousands of families. I want to thank our local congressional delegation who has shown up in big ways to help us with these distributions. And our outgoing Congressman Hurd has loaded a lot of trunks, and he'll be missed. When I'm out at those distributions and see the great work that's coming from our community to feed these families, I check in with our staff and volunteers, but then I walk the lines to greet the families. Many of these families lost their jobs in our hospitality industry. One couple met at the hotel where they both worked. They were called in to work on the same day and let go. They and their 3 children, not knowing how they're going to nourish their kids, were in that line to get food. The program to rescue the food service supply chain and to help families should be applauded. I am personally grateful for USDA in initiating this program because I do believe it is a huge success. But there's some opportunity to tighten up, some opportunity to improve. And in 2 specific areas, it would be in equity and accountability. When it comes to equity, it's equity between those that got food and those that didn't. Equity between those that got paid and those that didn't. Some areas got a lot of produce, some got zero. Some got dairy, some got none. Having no distribution plan with just a thought to work with any 501c3 seemed a little willy-nilly. It does not honor the planning and logistics that go into these last mile distributions, the food safety that goes along with it, and the expenses. Many Feeding America food banks had to raise funds from private philanthropy to support this public program. Specifically, when it comes to accountability, food banks in the Feeding America network know how to read a bill of lading. They understand audits. From many of the contractors, there wasn't significant data on the bill of lading to know what you would be signing for and what you were not. Working with a local contractor here in San Antonio, we struggled to meet basic things like labeling. Some of the protein boxes, which should have been a diverse variety of protein, contained 5 5-pound boxes of peppered chicken labeled for commercial use. Families didn't know the heating instructions. We had to reach out to the manufacturer, which was in California, to get heating instructions to include in all the boxes we distributed. Oftentimes, the details come down to the corrugated box. The box didn't have enough air, so the produce rotted. Onions competed with cantaloupes, and many of the cantaloupes were rotten. We wish the contractor would have substituted those cantaloupe for some of those sweet potatoes mentioned earlier, but they just pulled out the cantaloupe. More opportunity to get families out of the parking lot and into grocery stores is ultimately what's needed. And this will happen when the economy strengthens and people go back to living wages. But until then, I would encourage boosting SNAP 15%. The heat of South Texas has families struggling in these parking lots, and we would all be better served to move them out of these parking lots and into grocery stores where they can shop for the nutritious food. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share some thought on this matter. From all of us in San Antonio, muchas gracias.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Mr. Habash, please begin when you're ready.
Thank you and good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Matt Habash and I serve as the CEO of the Mid-Ohio Food Collective, one of the largest hunger relief organizations in the country and the largest here in Ohio. We serve a blended footprint of 20 counties in central and eastern Ohio, which includes urban, rural, and Appalachia. Over the past year, we have served over about 600,000 of our neighbors and distributed almost 75 million pounds of food through a network of 680 partner agencies. From March to June, we distributed almost 30 million pounds of food, a 30% increase in comparison to the same time last year. We also had over 396,000 visits, including nearly 25,000 families, new families who have never asked for help before. All made possible by the fact that 95% of our agencies remained open. To highlight our relationship with USDA, this past fiscal year, we distributed over 20 million pounds of food through TFAP, CFSP, and ESFP. This is a testament to our partnership and a strong one. Thank you also to the Undersecretary Ibach, who visited us yesterday to see our work. To date, we've received 42,590 boxes, about 1.1 million pounds of milk, dairy, vegetables, and fruit. Never got offered the meat that Eric did. We're scheduled through August 2020 for 95,000 boxes and 2.5 million pounds. While coordinating delivery in all 20 counties, we're particularly focused on the rural counties. All the pre-planning in this program for us was around identifying a single agency in the 18 counties we have outside of Central, right here in Columbus, for local distribution. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. We're grateful to the suppliers and USDA for the amount of and the quality of the products. CFAPs also help in supporting our food as health strategy to provide nutritious food to customers as part of an overall health care. Along with ensuring less food waste, the efficiencies of having food packed and ready for delivery is key to a touch-free system to mitigate COVID-19 exposure. But in all transparency, there have been certain issues with the program. Not all distributors can pack and deliver the food as promised. When there are coordination issues, it increased cost to food banks for storage and distribution, straining the resources of food banks even more when already working hard to provide the rapid response to the 30% increase in demand caused by COVID. And also is concerning is the fact that it has been inequitable in access, in process, and in distribution around the country. Frankly, many vendors are failing to adhere to their contracts, creating logistical difficulties and contributing to the inequity. In addition, utilizing nonprofits outside of the food distribution chain adds to coordination issues and creates confusion. And I would say you heard a lot already in the earlier panel about safety, and we were equally concerned about that as well. Moving forward, it's incumbent on USDA to strengthen its communications with partners to streamline the process and ensure success, a goal we all seek. In my written testimony, I've included a national information to provide a larger context. In short, incorporating more streamlined coordination, transparency in communications, and deeper accountability of the program will go a long way in our collective efforts to help feed families who are struggling to put food on their tables. Looking at hunger relief overall, we know the most efficient way to address food insecurity during this crisis is to increase SNAP benefits, increasing the SNAP Thrifty Food Plan by at least 15% and a minimum benefit from $16 to $30 for the duration of this public health threat will provide economic boosts while fighting food insecurity. Extending the PEBT authority into the next school year and extending the multiple waivers and declarations tied to all anti-hunger programs will help ensure access to food for families. Providing an additional $500 million for TFAP food purchase and storage and distribution will help food banks continue to meet unprecedented demand. And providing an additional $540 million to support acquisition of essential equipment will ensure safe food receipt and delivery. It's also imperative that National Guard deployment at food banks continue. The pandemic decimated our volunteer base that was 13,000 strong and committed nearly 75,000 of hours of service in our facility. We're ready to help expand the CFAP's reach. Our recommendations are, 1, focus on strengthening food access. This is not an equitable program. You heard from many parts of the country who got a lot of food and other parts of the country who got next to none. Provide clarity on distribution costs and responsibility of contractors. When it says truck to trunk, that means take it to the site that it's supposed to, not give it to the food bank. We don't necessarily can say no because of the fact that Some food banks don't have the resources to transport the food across their service territories, especially given what's going on right now. And continue to provide contract oversight to encourage contractors to coordinate the work among nonprofit pantries to avoid duplication of services. We encourage Congress and USDA to ensure this program provide food through all 4 phases of the program. We stand ready to support, and on behalf of the 600,000 people we help, thank you.
Thank you. Let's see, where are we? We will now begin member questions. We will begin with Ms. Adams. You are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam
I'm
Chair.
sorry,
Can you hear
3
me?
minutes, Ms. Adams, 3 minutes, thank you.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me? Thank you. Thank you to our panelists today. I've heard from North Carolina nonprofits and food banks, and despite the Farmers to Families Food Box Program being billed as a truck-to-trunk, vendors are not necessarily storing and distributing the food provided. So as a result, these banks have been handling the logistics, absorbing the cost of storage, et cetera. So are your organizations handling the distribution and storage of the food boxes that you have received, and have they, in terms of participating in the program, had any impacts on their orders and other programs? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
This is Matt from Columbus, Ohio, the Mid-Ohio Food Bank. You know, we're taking in all the product. We didn't have any contractor that was willing to deliver to the 18 sites. We have 9 Appalachian counties that we serve, as well as Columbus, and they were unwilling to do that. So, to say we could have said no means people don't get food. Nobody's paying us, with the exception of what was mentioned. Weir's Farms up in northern Ohio was paying us $1 a box. That is the only vendor that's agreed to pay any money in our program so far.
Okay, so based on the recent rise in cases of COVID, how many pounds of food do you anticipate distributing in the coming months?
Well, we normally do about 75 million pounds a year, and that was already up from about 63 million the year before, and we're anticipating probably closing in on 100 million pounds of food if we can find the food.
Okay.
It's just the demand's up 30%.
Okay, so was the food that you received from the program from a national, regional, or local producer, and do you think that this impacted your experience with the program?
Well, Eric, you want to go chime in, or do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenges with the program is it's just not providing enough volume. Many food banks are going away hungry, if you will, because the supply is not meeting the demand. And then the challenges around the logistics and the expenses associated. The thought that food banks have the power to negotiate, it really is powerless. You either accept the food or you don't. The contractors will move that product to some other community, and you would miss out. And so we need the food. Ultimately, the line of families need nourishment, and we're just, in a way, we'll take the food and fundraise to cover the expenses if we have to.
Great. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for being here. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. Ranking Member Conaway, you are recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Eric, the dramatic photograph from early April of cars lined up at your facility, does that happen every single day?
We have about 20 of those distributions a week. Now, that photograph was at the largest distribution, which occurred at the onset of the crisis, where 10,000 families came to get food. Our average distributions.
But you give away food. You pass out food every day at that site?
No, we rotate throughout South Texas at multiple sites.
All right. I got a note here from Libby Campbell, one of your cohorts, that I have the pleasure of representing. She got 1,200 boxes yesterday of cheese, butter, produce, and cream, and it's all out in the hands of consumers in less than 24 hours. So I need to brag on Libby and her team over in Midland and Odessa for making that happen. Fellas, both your testimony is almost exactly the same thing. Did Feeding America give you that testimony?
So absolutely, we're all connected with Libby.
Okay.
She's a great
Eric,
banker.
I got a limited amount of time, Eric. I'm going to be a little abrupt. I apologize for that. Are you free to disagree with that?
Absolutely.
Okay. Does your board did they go through that with you and adopt that, or is that you and Matt put that out on behalf of San Antonio, Ohio?
Yes.
Go ahead, Eric.
Our board supports us in that, and again, congratulations on working with Libby. I know last time we were together, Congressman, it was in Midland, and I know that was the first truckload of CFAP boxes that they received there in that community.
Well, thanks.
Congressman Conway.
Yeah, Matt.
This is Matt. My testimony is my own. It was not written by Feeding America. It's what we experienced here in Central and Eastern Ohio.
Yeah, Matt. The recommendations up here, almost word for word for that with Eric's. I don't know where either one of you got it, but I think it came off of Feeding America, which is fine in that regard. But you guys pay fees to Feeding America to belong to their organization?
They actually support us. They with food and funds across the United States. That the network works very, very well together to make
But
sure.
you don't pay Feeding America an annual fee.
I mean, we have some dues that we pay, but not in any comparison to the support that we get.
Yeah. Well, thank you, guys. I appreciate that limited amount of time. The chairman made some interesting comments about being anxious about the potential waste in this food program. I would hope that the other side would be just as indignant over the waste in the food stamp program, because they tolerate a $37 error rate in the over and under payments as if that doesn't happen at all, and billions are lost in these improper payments. And I don't hear the same kind of righteous indignation associated with those error rates as the potential or alleged errors within this program. With that, I yield back.
I'm concerned about every error in every program. Ms. Hayes, you are recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Cooper or Mr. Habash, I heard your concerns about the fact that some of your producers were not local and didn't really know the area that they were expected to provide products for. Had you created the application process for the Farmers to Families food box, is there anything that you would have done differently that would have helped to improve your experience?
Hey, I'll go first. Eric from San Antonio. It's really a coordinated distribution plan. I know Congressman Conaway, maybe we're similar food banks, a part of the same network, but we represent diverse parts of the country and a diverse network of nonprofit organizations. Again, for us in San Antonio, over 500 different organizations that are feeding the 120,000 people each week, and coordinating those families to make sure that one, they can be at the distribution, the amount of time it takes, the food safety aspects to keep the product under refrigeration, having the right equipment, and just making sure that families are fed in an equitable way, that you don't have families showing up and walking away without anything. Though that takes planning and logistics, and I think a little more effort in the coordination of that distribution plan to make sure that there's not duplication, nonprofits running into each other, organizations taking more food than they know. Many of the contractors only would ship a full truckload. So some of these churches were overwhelmed with the sheer volume, and many Feeding America food banks were having to go and rescue that food, pick it up at the distribution site to take it back to their warehouse to get the product under cold storage. That's where food waste occurs. That's where food safety is compromised. And that's what I would do to strengthen some of the aspects of the program.
Did you hear from local farmers about their involvement in being part of the production line?
Many of our local farmers throughout the Winter Garden in Southwest Texas were frustrated just because they didn't feel like they were a part of the program. Some local cooperatives put in bids, but were not awarded.
We had a similar experience here in Columbus where we had none of our local contractors got any bids. And so we had to depend on vendors willing to drive much larger distances to get any food at all in the beginning. The other suggestion, we organized ourselves through the Ohio Association of Food Banks to work on this program collectively for all 12 food banks. And you got Feeding America with 200 food banks across the country and thousands of agencies that are all doing this every day. So that system works really well in this country.
Thank you. My time has expired, but I just have one last question. If you could just say yes or no. Connecticut received boxes as part of this program, but everyone I've talked to says that the best way for government to keep families fed is to bolster the SNAP program by 15%. Do you agree?
Yes.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bacon, you are recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Cooper, would you say the Farm to Table program is doing a good job alleviating hunger in your area?
Yeah, it's a fabulous program to be able to get that type of dairy, protein, and produce to families.
Would you like more of it?
Absolutely. It's not meeting the demand that we see in our lines.
Mr. Cooper, same questions. Is it alleviating hunger, or would you like more of it?
This is me, Matt.
Or Mr.
Yes.
Habash?
Yes.
Sorry, my fault.
Thank you, Congressman. Yeah, the answer is yes. I mean, without a doubt, we need the food stamp program and we need additional food. There's people that don't qualify for food stamps that are asking for help. So what are we supposed to do? We need the food. So the answer is yes, we can use it. We are big into food as health as a strategy. This program helps do that.
There were some comments that some of the food comes a little old. Would you say that a lot of the food, though, is more fresh than maybe you get at the grocery store, being that it's coming straight from the farmer? I'll ask you both. Thank you.
Yeah, I think mostly the same quality. I think it's just, it was super convenient to have the produce packed in the boxes, but not all contractor was equal. Some of those boxes, they weren't packed very full. And so once they were stacked on top of each other, the boxes would crush, the produce would get crushed, the pallets would turn over. In the truck that was delivering it to us, they'd be all, falling over. And so just some consistencies and tightening up some of those processes could really improve the program. And we hope that USDA would consider having the contractors do that.
I have no doubt there could be ways to tighten the program. I used to live on a farm until I joined the Air Force, and I can tell you there's nothing better than fresh tomatoes and sweet corn and so forth. But one last question. What would you say is the percentage of the produce that you get actually is given to people in need? Is it 90%, 95%, 98%? What would you say? Just trying to get it rough, because to me that's a good gauge of success.
100% of the produce that we're receiving is going to families.
I would say the same thing, Congressman. If it's come directly from a farm, it's absolutely 100% of the food. If it comes from a retail outlet, that has leftovers that are pulling off the shelves, then you have a little bit of, basically shrink that isn't going to be usable. But it comes straight from the farms, and we love product directly from the farms. It's in and out of our door in 24 hours. That's good, because what I'm hearing is there's not much being thrown out in that situation. So I'm hearing is you're giving out about 100% of the produce. It's helping alleviate hunger, and you'd like more. So I appreciate your great feedback, and I yield back, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Panetta, you are recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate this opportunity. Gentlemen, thank you for your service, and apologize for you not being here in front of us, but know you're doing a lot better job and a lot more to the people that you serve than being here. I appreciate you being there, so thank you very much. Quickly, I know one of you mentioned the National Guard and the benefits that they're providing there. Can you go into that a little bit more?
Sure. We very early in Ohio asked our governor for National Guard support, so this is early March. We were lucky, as the State Association of Food Banks, 12 of us made a direct request for all of us. I asked for 100 National Guards people. They have been here since the later part of March. They're scheduled to expire on August the 7th, then they have 2 weeks of furlough. The money's run out. We could not get volunteers. I have 754 volunteer slots a week to fill. They have filled those. They have delivered meals to seniors. They have stepped in and packed 27,000 emergency boxes. They have delivered these CFAP boxes. They are running our pantry, which went from 100 families a day to 700 families a day because of this. So they have been a godsend to us, and we would love to keep them, because right now Well, we got to remember, it's not all senior citizens for volunteers. Some of it's corporate, and their corporations are not willing to come back, particularly when the pandemic's rising here in Ohio.
Understood.
You know, we too have got National Guard and would not be able to maintain as many distributions as we're doing without them, just because of the spike of cases. A lot of our volunteers are seniors. So it's been an incredible backbone of strength to get these food boxes to families.
Good, and that's exactly what I see out on the Central Coast of California. Is every week I go out to food distribution sites, and let me tell you, going to the sites that have the National Guard make it a little bit easier, a little smoother, and let me tell you, the people that work for the food banks are very thankful for their participation, so we'll hopefully continue to work with our governor to make sure that they stay there in California as well. Talk to me about the percentage of new recipients you're seeing come to your food banks. I know in my area it's about 40% new recipients from the pre-COVID pandemic. What are you guys seeing?
Yeah, I think because of our significant hospitality industry in San Antonio, about 50% of who we're receiving were first-time recipients of our food bank, and it caused us to really partner with hotels, restaurant associations to do some outreach to connect to their furloughed workers, but it's about 50%.
This is Columbus. Ours is a little lower than that, but we can tell you exactly that as of today, 27,430 new families have shown up that have never asked for help. We have a data tracking system that goes back 10 years. These are new family store systems that have never asked for help ever before.
Okay, let me just ask this real quick question before my time runs out. In your opinion, what federal food program has the most impact on people receiving these types of benefits, in your opinion?
The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, is the first line of defense, and really is super efficient because it capitalizes on the existing infrastructure of grocery stores in rural communities and urban, and that's what can strengthen households' nutrition.
Congressman, we have said here that we're not going to food bank our way out of hunger. At the end of the day, it's the SNAP program is the number one. And then as you look at who else doesn't qualify for SNAP because their income's above that, food banks and the pantries that we have are the only line of defense for them as well.
Appreciate that. Appreciate your service. I yield back. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Ranking Member Conaway, in the absence of Mr. Johnson, do you wish to make any closing comments?
No, ma'am, I'm good to go. Thank you.
All right. As we close, let me just ask one question to you both. Did you say anything today that was not accurate, to the best of your knowledge?
No.
So no matter who wrote it, it was accurate?